Our guest today is a special founder from right here in Florida. He has an incredible passion for building amazing brands, empathetic teams, and doing incredible work, and has spent the last 15 years demonstrating that as a serial entrepreneur. In today's conversation, we'll get down in the dirt on how his current B2B SaaS product has weathered a scary strategic pivot that nearly led to his company going out of business, but now has seen him seeing exponential growth to the tune of 5 million plus ARR and growing by the day. CEO and founder of GoGig, Chris Hodges, welcome to The Dirt.
How you doing, Jim?
So Chris, you've got a lot of things that you've overcome in the last year or two, not just being a Purdue fan, but also in your business. Any insight that you can share with the group would be helpful, just because a lot of folks have felt the same pressure over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? So it's, the number one thing I would share just about, being a founder or, whatever, especially my background is really coming from a growth perspective. I'm a sales guy at heart. I wrote the algorithm for GoGig, but that's just a fancy word for a giant math equation, right? So the number one thing that I would obviously share with founders is just about the ability to be able to separate people from their money when it comes to growing and selling your business. If it's B2B software as a service, even if the product isn't where it needs to be, proving that concept and understanding your sales cycle, building those relationships with customers, even if the product is just standing barely on its own with just its, duct tape holding it together. Get out there, open up doors, get to know the person that would eventually buy your product. So that way, whenever you're done building, where they need to see it and they're ready to pilot it or whatever the case may be, you've already done 18 months of work, leading up through that long sales process. So start selling tomorrow, right? Regardless of where you're at on the product.
Yeah, that's something so many founders, especially ones that have background in product and tech, right? It's got to be perfect before I go out to sell it. And in reality, you're going to learn so much in your first few sales cycles alone that otherwise you'll end up in the same iterative cycle. What did your first few sales cycles look like as you were growing? And I know I mentioned the pivot before, but you mind just talking a little bit about how GoGig has kind of evolved and been able to see this incredible growth of the last year?
Yeah. So what I quickly found out, and I'll never do this again personally, but I ran, when GoGig first started, we were a talent marketplace. It matched job seekers to hiring companies. So you had a two-sided marketplace. You needed to scale the amount of users in the platform, meaning job seekers, in order to meet the demands of the hiring professionals on the other side. And you kind of have to do it in some sort of tandem way, whether that's regionally or industry focused or whatever the case ends up being. Fortunate for other companies that were growing marketplaces with lots of users, call it Facebook, Snapchat, or, pick any. LinkedIn's probably our parallel example. But when the 2008 downturn hit, they really got that flywheel going. People needed to professionally network. They didn't know what the fuck to do. So they started flocking to this website that would help them professionally open doors and build relationships. So that's, without spending a whole lot of marketing, the timing was really ripe for somebody to, grow from a flywheel perspective on a professional networking platform. That was not the case for us, right? Just like podcasts have grown, and it's become really hard to, grow your listening audience. It was really hard for us to grow our user base. Getting a few 100,000 users was a massive milestone for us. Lots of candidates started to join. That looks good to investors, but you've got LinkedIn that has 500 million users on the platform. So even if we had 1 or 2 million or 3 million, it's nowhere near the scale that we needed to achieve. So lots of money would have needed to get sunk into the company in order to grow it. We would have had to raise astronomical amounts of capital at astronomical valuations, which would get us to a point of no return to be able to sell it later on down the road, because we would have a valuation that would be so high, no one would be able to buy it. So we started to grow this business. We started to generate revenue from it. So companies would sign up, they pay their monthly subscription and those sort of things. But we weren't, ignore COVID for a minute, but we weren't meeting like we were getting tons of companies flocking to the concept of GoGig, remaining anonymous in job search. But, we would have car dealerships, people looking for aeronautical engineers, cruise lines, Ulysses Nardine watches, right? BurgerFi, right? Different customers that were coming and using our platform, but they needed all different types of people. And the few 100,000 users we had just didn't meet the demands for every single one of them. So our churn rate was high, but the people that were getting results, the churn rate was low. So it was kind of a weird dynamic and kind of the challenge of growing a two-sided marketplace. The best thing we did for our company was after we made the pivot over to a B2B software as a service model, where we took our original intellectual property, we started white labeling it, and we sold it to companies that already had databases of candidates that they could promote it to on their own. So we essentially nixed one side of the two-sided marketplace challenge. Yes, it's still a two-sided marketplace business, but we went to companies that already had traffic from the candidate perspective, whether that's university alumni associations with databases of alumni, unemployment offices that already have job seekers revolving through their doors, or large enterprise companies that already have job seeker traffic pinging their careers pages. We just took our talent community, customized it to these verticals, and then sold the community directly to them, which was, it's cheaper, you keep your burn rate lower, you can run a more modest company. Your sales cycle gets a little longer, because you're doing enterprise level custom contracts, but it was the best decision we ever made, because when we ran out of money when COVID hit, we were able to sustain a really low burn rate with a nice sales team and sales cycle process, and see that through to eventually get to the end of that 18-month sales cycle. And once those contracts started tipping, all of a sudden it becomes, you're at, we got smashed down to $100 a month in revenue when COVID hit. All of a sudden you're at $500,000 burn, ARR. Then you get to 700, then you hit $1 million, then you get 1.2, then you hit 3. Then, these larger contracts start to tip over and waterfall. And that revenue metric is really what a lot of investors, pay attention to. And that's unfortunate in my opinion, but that's just the nature of being able to, raise capital.
Well, you hit on that it's unfortunate. And there's obviously a couple of different schools of thought, right? It's revenue growth is paramount. And that's the whole grow fast mentality. But what I think you're referring to that gets oftentimes ignored is you got to grow smart first and build the foundation, so that no matter how fast you grow, you're able to actually sustain that growth, right? Which I think a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of investors sometimes forget about, because you're so lost in the recurring revenue growth theme that you almost forget what you're doing here in the first place, which is proving value for customers that are going to stick around and love you, right?
Yeah. We spent 2 years building an AI component of our technology before GoGig launched. And there were, I would say, of the 47 outside investors we have in our company today, 25 of them didn't give a shit about it. Like, they paid more attention to financial pro formas built off of current sales pipeline and the percentage propensity to close those deals than they did the intellectual property that was spent by double PhDs that are on our team that built this natural language processing cultural fit matching component of our tech. So it's disheartening to see, and that's why I said at the beginning of the podcast, like, doesn't matter where your product is, just start building that pipeline. Right. And if you're raising money, like, go raise against that and your ability to sell and show that people, I mean, obviously that intellectual property needs to deliver value to customers. So I almost enjoy the sales pitch more than I do the investment pitch these days. I'd rather be on it. And I close way less sales than, your close rate is way less on a customer, enterprise customer than it is on an investor. So under most circumstances, when you're trying to close a 3-year contract. But you actually get to pitch your product. You get to pitch the value proposition of that product, why it's going to deliver value to them, why you built it in the first place. So that's a more fun scenario for me personally. But it's unfortunately, it's not really what investors pay attention to, especially in the B2B SaaS space.
Yeah, and I mean, they are in this to make a return, right? So there's a certain understanding and element of that totally it makes sense. But I think what you're getting at not only isn't just the foundation of growth, but also that, provided that what you are building is accepted and eagerly accepted, evangelized by customers, if you will, like that's really how all the business gets to, become a business anyways. That's how the revenue stays revenue, right? That's how customers stay customers, is by really understanding and having a great use for the product that they've purchased and the value of the product. So it makes total sense. When you think about, I think you said it's not all sunshine and roses. It's not all yellow brick road. Founders all the time are talking about big exits and, big investment rounds and big deals. And, we're kind of cultured to, only talk about the good stuff. Right. And so part of the reason for this podcast is to kind of get down in the dirt about what got us to the good stuff. Right. Do you have any examples of, within the pivot that you made or within, some of the past couple of years of obstacles that really stick out in terms of what fundamentally allowed you to weather the storm, if you will?
I wasn't early on. I wasn't afraid to give away equity to really smart people that would take my call at 12 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. So like a bunch of advisors, call them therapists at this point if you want. But there's a lot of when you watch, we watched our revenue go from getting close to $1 million ARR down to $100 a month in 60 days. So it was because no one was hiring, right? Everybody goes into a hiring freeze. Our old model just, we got smoked. So you kind of have to look at that and say, okay, it fucking sucks, but do you just, cut your losses and walk away, or do you, sit in a room and figure out how you can, take what you've built and then figure something else out. So we just, we kind of sat in a room and, obviously PPP did nothing for us. It extended our runway by a month and a half. So the federal government wasn't going to step in with a handout for us. It didn't cover 1099s, which, in and of itself is a political discussion. And then, so that didn't help. Then you have to go back to your cap table and say, okay, which investors are going to step up and, kind of bridge you and extend your runway. And we didn't, we got a few, but, but we didn't get a lot. So we have, you're staring at a 4-month runway and you say, okay, how do we turn this thing around and try and get a couple of customers in through the door or get enough traction so that way we can attract some new outside capital to, stack up some convertible notes or something along those lines. So, learning how to weather that storm is just, one, you got to find something to do whenever, the shit hits the fan outside of just being an entrepreneur. And for me, it was powerlifting and, playing drums and just cranking up the metal music. Right. But that's just me because I'm a crazy, white kid. So that's just what worked for me. But, a lot of people find peace in doing things like yoga or working on their car or, taking a walk or meditating or whatever the case ends up being, but just find that and then, find somebody who can help you row the boat right at the same time. So like, whether that's your significant other or your best friend or whatever, whatever that is. So if you those were the things that just kind of help you get through that bullshit. and you can kind of call them, call your advisors, talk to them. Don't be afraid to tell them that stuff sucks. And then you make your own decision. Like, you got, in our case, 3.5 months of runway. What do? We made the pivot. We found 4 industries. We're like, I think this will work for higher ed. I think this will work for government because they just got a massive stimulus check from the Biden administration. So let's go try and get some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's keep maintaining relationships with companies that are still in the hiring freeze. So when they start hiring again, we don't know when that's going to be, but they'll be ready to go. So, and nobody's calling them right now. Nobody's trying to sell to HR people because they're all getting laid off. So we just did that. And we're like, all right, these are our 4. We're going to spray and pray and see what sticks. And the government one was the one that stuck because at that time, because they were the only people that had money. So, and government contracts, when you nail one, you're good for 5-10 years on those. So, we got 1 and then we got 2, and that's kind of what kept us what kept us going. And a lot of people told us not to go down the government route. They're like, yeah, well, there's a reason why you're not competing against other startups in the government, because nobody wants to sell to them. Right. So, but it turns out that all I did was just cold called a bunch of lobbyists. So I was like, and I was like, which one of you guys would work for, like, here's what our product does. Do any of you want to work for equity instead of a retainer? And I'll pay you a success fee. And turns out I got a bunch of them. So we started getting a bunch of politicians and, lobbyists that came on board that, like, yeah, you want to talk to the White House? Here you go. And so that was kind of what ended up working for us, but it was a spray and pray tactic. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. You touch on two key themes at the end there too, right? Number one, cold calling isn't dead. Like,
yeah.
If used in a strategic manner, it can be used just as any other go-to-market strategy. And it sounds like you were able to leverage that, and that's incredible. And then the second one is leveraging channels, right? You don't have to always go direct to the customer, right? You can figure out who's got influence over your customer, in your case, lobbyists, right? And they were able to really help not only do part of the battle for you on the front end of the sales process, but also get you access where you might not have been able to get access otherwise. So, I mean, that's awesome. And kudos to you from, being able to maintain things, getting all the way down to 100 and now up to 5 and 10 and 20 million plus. Man, you're on a roll here. And I think, from my perspective, after knowing you for a couple of years now and meeting you down at Emerge in Miami, right? I think a lot of it's because you are kind of rooted in strategy, right? Like your business is rooted in a mission and a purpose. And although you've had to pivot some of the product and some of the strategic value to who it, has value towards, your roots under the ground of what you're building have been there and a great foundation. Were you able to keep the team intact and, things along those lines? How supportive were investors? Things like that, just as you work through this challenge? Were you on your own, or did you have a really, supportive team and investors behind you?
I talked about the advisors, so I won't go down that route again, but every advisor is an investor in GoGig, right? So a couple of them, that we met through mutual relationships, but the from the team perspective, nobody left. I didn't lay anyone off when we went down to 100. So I was like, I could have gotten my burn rate, or I could have gotten my run rate from 3.5 months up to 6 or 7 if I would have laid everyone off, but I didn't do it. So I don't know why I didn't do it, but I didn't. So because they were like, hey, we're here, we're in this, so let's rock and roll. And I kind of kept the hey, we're getting absolutely smoked close to my chest. I didn't tell them everything was going well, but I just said, hey, like, COVID sucks, right? They may not be ready to buy right now, but you got in, right? You got in with the head of talent acquisition at Ernst & Young, right? So they're not ready to buy for 18, 12 months, whatever, until COVID's over. They might get laid off, but you're in. So I said, let's just go get another one, go get another one, go get another one, and just let's just build as much pipe as we possibly can. Because if we're able to get that traction, then we can demonstrate at least some level of success to our investors. And that's all that mattered to most, if not all of them, was that, hey, listen, we may not be growing the top line right now, but here's what the pipeline looks like. And here's like, I'll even show you some recorded demos so you can hear their feedback. Listen to the call. You can hear that this is going to deliver value for them. Mm-hmm. And then so the level of support that all of our investors had, we're a couple of them on edge about writing in another check. Yeah. So, but most of them were just like, hey man, whatever you need, like I'll introduce you to this person in my network or that person. So I just, I had a bunch, like we didn't raise a massive round of funding at the very beginning. We got a bunch of singles, a bunch of small checks that totaled up to, raising our entire round. And I didn't care if that looked like a muddy cap table. I liked everybody and had a personal relationship with all of them. Right. So I had 40 people I could call and say, who do you know? Like, I need 3 people. Like, it could be an investor, it could be a potential customer. Just give me 3. And then let's go let's just set up that conversation. We took the 3, that's, 120 people. Right. So we had those discussions and it ended up going well. We met more people. So everybody was pretty supportive. I mean, obviously you get a couple of what the fuck calls. Like, are you thinking? Mm-hmm. Like, why are you going to go sell to a higher education institution when they're more broke than even HR enterprises, and that's your business that got smoked. But I kind of said, hey, listen, we're at a point where we need to sell this thing to 4 different market segments. Our pipeline is going to be massive whenever we're done. And then we're just going to see which ones we'll be able to close. We can shave them off later when things start to recover. But at least, we built up a $52 million sales pipeline in 18 months. So that was there. That was real.
That's something that people forget as they're in their early growth stages. Like they keep getting all this pressure. Don't have a muddy cap table, like you mentioned, right? Like, don't let too many folks in because you're going to have too many competing priorities. At the end of the day, as long as you set expectations, and what I love about you, Chris, is I always saw you as someone who set expectations with investors quite well, and other folks as well, but particular investors who are a little bit harder to wrangle in many cases and manage, if you will. Because of that, what I'm hearing you say is that because of allowing more folks on the cap table, because of how exclusive and focused you were on finding the right investors, when shit hit the fan, they were there for you in a way that wasn't just fiscal, right? It wasn't just, yeah, man, here's another check, or no, man, don't have any more money for it. It was, how can I make sure to help you survive this and tell me whatever you need? And that's cool. That's incredible to hear.
Yeah. I mean, you got a guy that, that writes you a $10,000 check, and he's an accredited investor, but writes you a $10,000 check and he's just a regular old guy or a gal, then like they care about that $10,000 a lot more than an LP, a VC. Like, we've got a couple of VCs. I called them, and then the person that did the due diligence on our deal got laid off because of COVID. There was a new person that got put in the charge of the fund. And when I called them, they go, "Who are you?" And I was like, they don't care. It's like, but that guy cared a lot about his 10 grand. So he's like, whatever you need, we'll help you. So having those angels on board that maybe didn't have the biggest names that turned out to be a really good strategy. And the quote unquote muddy cap table wasn't a downside for us, even in the slightest.
Yeah, and you kept the team together. Sounds like you displayed some level of vulnerability with folks, but obviously, wanted to make sure that you still were the leader in other aspects and didn't, show them everything, which kind of brings up something that is a theme I talk about a lot with founders, which is vulnerability, right? Like, do you feel like vulnerability in a startup, in a growth stage business, is a good or a bad thing for a leader?
I think it's a very good thing. Yeah. You know, it can come in where it can bite you in the ass is if you have different personalities that conflict,
Mm.
right? Where you've got if you have so you need to make sure that the top, core of your team has, a personality that isn't necessarily exactly the same as yours. It's kind of the opposite. So that way they bring different perspectives to the table, but you can clash. But the vulnerability is, a really good thing. And, don't be afraid to let them know that, hey, this is going wrong, right? And, and set the expectation to your team, because, they may get a little nervous. Like, you don't want to tell them, hey, we've got X amount of days of runway or months of runway in the bank before the company dies.
Right.
Don't say that. That's too much information. But like, hey, we lost this customer. Like, let's all get together and understand exactly why this happened. And, they told us they were going to go with a global rollout, and now they're just, in a 90-day pilot. Why did that happen? Like, this is a mistake that I made, or whatever the case ends up being. And it's not, in investor updates and stuff like that, I always throw the negative stuff in there too.
Mm.
So I think it's a really good thing. I highly recommend it. Uh, because I think you're also going to weed out the people that, early stage employees and stuff like that, that don't want to, be in this high risk sort of environment, or just don't enjoy that type of culture. The vulnerability at least gives them an idea of what to expect for working at a company at a growth stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And now, now that you're kind of on the other side of that, right? And obviously not the other side of vulnerability, but the other side of that, those some of those obstacles, you've got new obstacles around
Yeah.
talent, right?
Yeah.
Namely, and I know you're looking for some sales and engineering talent. And we'll make sure to, let folks know where they can find those job descriptions in the notes. But as you're looking to scale the team and take this thing to the next level, what other, other than just, needing to hire more talent, which is obvious, what's at the heart of either finding more talent or any other obstacles that you're now going through now that you've kind of, hit that 5+ million?
It's right now it's delivery of products, for our team, right? Making sure that, when I kind of mentioned during the early stages, you kind of sell the thing even if it's held together by duct tape in a lot of instances. So right now, making sure that, yes, you might have a contract inked where a couple million ARR would come from it, or whatever ends up, being the case. You got to make sure that what you just inked onto paper can be, delivered to the customer. Not that we didn't make any false promises, but that it can go above and beyond what their expectations would have otherwise been over the multi-year relationship. So, in a SaaS business, it's just ensuring that, you're not just focused on sales the entire time, right? It's now where you're playing a little bit of catch up, where you have to focus more on the research and development. How does your product stay ahead of the curve now that you've got that revenue growth? Because eventually 5 million, and everybody talks about that 10 million sticky point, right? A lot of companies struggle to get past that. So right now, if we can focus on, delivery of product and making sure that it's, the most cutting edge thing they've ever seen, then that's what's going to help you surpass those numbers a little bit later on down the road.
Mm-hmm. Any key roles, and I mentioned sales and tech, but any key roles that you found the most difficult in hiring for right now?
I mean, this one's a little unique to our business, but we're building out a government relations team.
Mm.
So to actually manage the lobbyists, people that have been in politics before on both sides of the aisle, or bipartisan, company. So that one's been really hard because, like, a lot of people are politicians, right? And they don't know how to sell. A lot of people are salespeople and they don't know how to work in politics. So that one's been extremely challenging, but maybe a more one that's applicable to everybody. I think our product support roles, like, product management has been a little bit tough for us, like quality, QA stuff, creative design, things like that has been a little bit of a challenge for us. Salespeople, it's really easy to judge, right? You're either good at selling stuff or you're not, and that's what I'm good at. So, or it's really easy for us to build a culture around being able to, sell here at GoGig. But those other ones outside of the engineers have been, like, more of the product support roles have been a little bit tough for us too.
Yeah, is it tough just from a quality perspective, or even just to get folks interested in the first place? Like, any or both?
It's a quality perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tech in general
Yeah.
is the skills that are out there and available. Folks are taking 2-3 jobs at a time in some cases. It's a very different landscape than it was a few years ago.
Of course.
Um, awesome. So, as you think about kind of rewinding, taking us back to the origin of GoGig, and all the crap that you've been through, all the opportunity that you've seen, and now you are starting to see some of that yellow brick road again. What you know what key things do you have for listeners that you might not have already mentioned, that they got to keep in mind in those early days, in those testing days where they might be losing some customers, right? Where they might be having relationships with their team that are being tested. Any of those early stage growth problems that you've got some other stage advice on, Chris?
And that's a tough question. So, um, you always have to, as it pertains to the team, like, the best thing that's worked for me here at GoGig during the early stages was not to, like, let them know that you're willing to just roll up your sleeves and do exactly what they're doing alongside them. So if things are not going right, let's say like you're looking at the silos of your business, and you're a product guy and you know how to code, then go code alongside your engineers for an entire weekend, right? Cut everybody else off, get everybody in a cold dark room, go code alongside them. And whatever they're doing wrong, if you can do it alongside them and say, hey, listen, like, this is how this is more effective, like this way, you're actually alongside them, doing it. In sales, it worked really well for us because I would pick up, right, like 390 deals in our sales pipeline. I would go, get on with the sales directors and say, what are the top 60 hottest deals that we're struggling with, right? To try and get over the hump. I take those 60 deals for the next 3 weeks, and you demonstrate to them how you can get them moving forward, right? But do it with them. And you can say, hey, listen, I know you all have had problems with this, but I just spent 3 weeks with you, and here are 8, 9, 10 demonstrable use cases where you were struggling, you hit sticky points. I actually worked on it in the same amount of hours you did, and here's how it got better. So instead of telling them what to do and micromanaging them or yelling at them or telling them they're wrong or doing tons of coaching sessions, actually do the damn thing with them. That's that in the early stages, whenever the founders, wearing all the hats and kind of doing everything, but, focus on that, area of the company that really needs the most help, and spend 3, 4, however many weeks you need to alongside them to actually show them how to do it better.
Hands on, baby. Nothing
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple folks that we've got in our network that you and I have, that have been value add to you, and I think some of them at least are in Tampa or in Florida, if we're thinking of the same folks.
Yeah.
The oftentimes a lot of founders are saying how hard it is to work in Florida, from getting capital and getting the right advisory help, and and really being able to build here in Florida. And you've been able to do it, right? You've been able to work through that, as challenging as that may be at times. Anything for other Florida specific folks that might be going through the same challenges of, man, the state is so disconnected, man, there's so many different pockets within Florida that I need to hit. Any sage advice there on call it raising capital or building relationships in the state of Florida?
Yeah, it was very frustrating during the early stages, right? I didn't particularly enjoy the conference that we met at. I have my complaints, right? But met you,
Yep.
So led to something, right? But let's talk about the capital piece for just a moment. Like, I wasn't afraid to just get on a plane and go raise from somewhere else. I'm seeing there's a drastic shift, especially even in Silicon Valley, because everybody's leaving California and New York. That was an advantage to the raising capital piece today in 2022. No longer are those VC funds looking to only invest in companies that are in their own backyard. Mm-hmm. So they are now location agnostic. So, and people are meeting in person again, so you can't blame COVID for it. So pulling the whole, hey, I'm going to be in town this week, meeting with some fake customer that doesn't exist. I would like to meet with you as well. That was the number one thing that opened up doors in different cities for us. So I would just, pick 10, 15 investors that you've been cold emailing or whatever, and play that card and just say, hey, I'm going to be in town this week. Go on Kayak and pick the cheapest day it is to fly. And then, grab your cheap flight, grab your cheap hotel, and then go spend 3-4 days out there actually meeting people in person. And then those relationships are built. It might cost you $300 or $500 to do it, but there's no excuse. Like, even if you live in Florida, why you can't get on a plane and just go somewhere else. Notwithstanding, when you get those relationships built in other cities that are more of the tech hubs, a lot of times the Florida-based funds are going to look at that and say, oh, you've got traction with this Silicon Valley fund or that New York-based fund. Now we'll go ahead and talk to you. Unfortunately, that is the case. And this is if you're talking to VC funds at more of the growth stage. If you're talking to angel investors, then, a lot of times, I just went and played around in Palm Beach for a while, and we got a couple of real estate moguls that wanted to diversify their portfolios into tech. That's happening a lot more than you'd think. So from the angel perspective, a lot of people are, the real estate market's hot. They think there's going to be a bubble. They need to diversify. So they're looking for alternative investments down here, whether or not you think they are. So I would stay here for the angel investors. When it comes to the venture funds, just go somewhere else, and then you'll get the attention of the people down here.
Sage advice from Chris Hodges. Although I do start to see that changing a bit in the mentality, which is good, where, Florida funds are getting more mature. Florida funds are beginning to, not necessarily rely on investment from other firms outside of Florida. And they're getting smarter, which I think is, going to help bridge that gap. But it's a great point. I've heard that time and time again of, investors invest where other people that have been successful investing have invested.
Yeah. And don't be afraid. What Florida does have that I've seen better than everywhere else is the family office community. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be afraid to raise from family offices ever. You don't have LPs. They're stage agnostic. There's tons of money. So I think the family office community is a really good one down here. We raised from a couple of family offices, and you get a lot of help from those people.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So at this part of the show, listeners know that this is kind of closing us off with a series of 5 rapid fire questions. So Chris, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. What is the number one metric or KPI that you and GoGig are relentlessly focused on?
Top line revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big one. What you gave a lot of advice for folks that were going through some of the early stage growth challenges that you were. And but what's a top tip for growth stage founders like you, kind of in that 5 million plus range?
I said this a moment ago on the call, but like, transition from your, revenue growth towards your research and development on product. You've got money coming in, invest a lot into R&D, keeping your product cutting edge, and get those people to love it, because there are going to be some elements of referrals, channel partnerships that are going to come into play, and some virality that's going to come outside of your traditional sales processes if your product can really deliver.
Awesome.
So,
what's a favorite book or podcast that's helped you grow as a leader or an individual?
Man, this is going to be atypical. I don't listen to business podcasts whatsoever. My dream job after I sell GoGig is I'm probably going to take up stand-up comedy. So I listen to a lot of comedians. My favorite is to keep me going is Two Bears, One Cave, with Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. But I listen to that one just to kind of, get out of the world of entrepreneurship, because it's day in, day out. That is all I do. That's not going to help the listeners much, but I don't listen to business podcasts whatsoever. So
other than the dirt, of course. Yeah.
Other than you guys, man.
Yeah. All right. What actor would play you in a movie?
Man, that's a tough one. I'm going to go with Adam Sandler, because I'm a pretty loopy guy. Or Kevin James, but
I could see both of those, and they both have pretty good beards when they want to as well, just like you.
Yeah.
What is going to be the title of your autobiography?
My life in and out of entrepreneurship, the truth about all the bullshit you think you know about me.
I like that. That's a long but meaningful title. Yeah. Man, I like that a lot. I was thinking maybe you were going to say something about Purdue and the Boilermakers, and maybe they're going to win a football championship one of these days, something like that.
I sure fucking hope so, man.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, listen, you've given so much today to our listeners, Chris, and always allow everyone a little bit of time for self-promotion on how others might be able to help you. I know you're closing out a pretty big investment round. You're hiring a lot, but what are the one or two things that listeners can help you and the rest of your squad at GoGig the most?
So first of all, our GoGig branded product has been pivoted towards, if you want to work at GoGig, you download GoGig or go to gogig.com and join our anonymous talent community. So that is like you saying, hey, I'm a software engineer or a sales professional that wants to come work at GoGig. So if there's interest, that's how you find us. We don't believe in job descriptions. So we anonymize the process to remove bias. So that's how we do it. So join GoGig if you are interested in getting connected with our team to potentially work here. That's number one. Number two, obviously, if hiring entities or things along those lines that are interested in improving their hiring processes, that is what we do. So love to talk to you.
Awesome, man. Anti-JD. Love it.
That's
it. That should be the title of your book. No, but on that note, Chris, just closing us off, what's the best way for listeners to get in touch with you if they want to learn more, or your team to learn more?
Hodges at GoGig.com. Also on LinkedIn, even though I don't use it for hiring. It's a great way to connect with me professionally. That is it.
Easy, simple, the way I like it. All right, man. Thanks for sharing all that dirt with us, and have yourself an awesome day.
Rock on, man. Thanks a million.
See you, Chris.
See you, buddy.